Welcome to First Do No Harm with Massachusetts Citizens for Life board member and physician Dr. Mark Rollo. This broadcast will focus on medical ethics from a Catholic perspective and address abortion, physician-assisted suicide, contraception, natural family planning, IVF, healthcare proxy, and other topics. Please be advised that this show may not be appropriate for children under 13.
Hello and welcome back to First Do No Harm, a show about medical ethics from a Catholic perspective. I'm Dr. Mark Rollo. Last time I featured part one of my interview with Mary Ellen Siegler, Massachusetts mom, educator, and organizational leader who spoke about the dangers of so-called comprehensive sexuality education, CSE, in the public schools, which threaten our families and our society. In this context, I quoted Pope Francis, who has said, "Beware of the new ideological colonization that tries to destroy the family. It is not born of the dream that we have from God and prayer. It comes from the outside, and that's why I call it colonization. Let us not lose the freedom to take forward the mission God has given us, the mission of the family. And just as our peoples were able to say in the past no to the period of colonization, as families, we have to be very wise and strong to say no to any attempted ideological colonization that could destroy the family, and to ask the intercession of St. Joseph to know when to say yes and when to say no." So said Pope Francis recently. In our time, it is time to say no. It is time to say no to the ideological colonization that pollutes our children with empty messages of hypersexualization and gender ideology that exists to an increasing extent in our public schools. Mary Ellen Siegler went through this in detail the last time, especially as it relates to the Worcester Public Schools recently inviting the Trojan horse of CSE into our public schools. Comprehensive sexuality education is a kind of ideological colonization, and as freedom-loving Americans, we know that colonization is a form of oppression from which we need to free ourselves. Today I will feature part two of my conversation with Mary Ellen Siegler as she continues to expound on the dangers of CSE to our children, our families, and our country. Let us first of all begin with prayer. For as stated by the U.S. Catholic bishops, only with prayer that storms the heavens for justice and mercy, prayer that cleanses our hearts and souls, will the culture of death that surrounds us today be replaced with a culture of life. O God, you created the family to be our first and most important school. We pray that you would continue to protect the family from outside forces that would undermine the authority and freedom of the family. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, before I play part two of my conversation with Mary Ellen Siegler, I would like to share excerpts from a recent speech by William Barr, former Attorney General to the United States, practicing Catholic, and a longtime defender of freedom. He delivered this speech very recently on May 20th, 2021. In this speech, he argued that the greatest threat to religious liberty in America today is the increasingly militant and extreme secular progressive climate of our state-run educational system. He opined that we are rapidly approaching the point, if we have not already reached the point, at which the heavy-handed enforcement of secular progressive orthodoxy through the government-run schools is totally incompatible with traditional Christianity and other major religious traditions in our country. In light of this development, we must confront the reality that it may no longer be fair or practical or even constitutional to provide publicly funded education solely through the vehicle of state-operated schools. He went on to relate that throughout the history of Western civilization, it has been generally understood that a true education, as opposed to merely the conveyance of technical skills or vocational know-how, is inherently bound up with religion and morality. It necessarily begins with the big questions. Is there truth? How do we arrive at truth? What is the end of life? How should we live? Civic virtue, moral virtue, religion, and knowledge were always regarded as inextricably linked. I will have much more to say about this important and timely address by Attorney General William Barr next time, because it is so appropriate and relevant to the recent decision by the Worcester Public School Committee to approve a radical form of comprehensive sexuality education, which undermines the family as well as the fundamental Judeo-Christian beliefs and values upon which our country, including our public school system, has been built. Now, here is part 2 of my conversation with Mary Ellen Siegler. We pick up the interview as we discuss the very disturbing and apparent foregone conclusion by the Worcester Public School Committee to adopt a very radical and I dare say pornographic form of comprehensive sexuality education. From the get-go, you could tell these people had their mind made up, the school committee members, yes, that, they were just sort of checking a box and placating the public or trying to placate the public that they're listening, but they clearly weren't listening.
They weren't.
And no. In fact, when you say the 60% of the parents who called in were opposed to it, and great number of these parents were minority parents.
Of course,
yes. They were the part of the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Asian Americans, and the school committee, who were not members of minority groups, as far as I could tell, were, ostensibly doing this to, help protect kids, but the parents of these kids were clearly not interested. And as you say, they were focused primarily on pleasing the interest group, which is primarily Planned Parenthood is behind a lot of this.
Right, absolutely, because Planned Parenthood knows that in order to create customers, they need people who are sexually active.
Yeah.
And so the teen population, particularly in a demographic like Worcester, where you have a lot of single-family homes, those kids are more vulnerable. So, and whenever there is a community where the student population, there's a high percentage of what's called an ACE score, adverse childhood experiences. So when you have, a higher percentage of the student population that has high ACE scores, so these are children that come from some kind of disadvantaged background or they have some challenge, they are particularly vulnerable. So they're very easily victimized. So and Planned Parenthood knows this.
Yeah.
And there are 25 super centers, Planned Parenthood super centers across the nation.
Yep.
And a super center is a center that's 10,000 square feet or more. And one of those is in the city of Worcester. So, it's really very important for Planned Parenthood to get into the Worcester School District. In fact, I don't know if you've ever heard of Monica Klein. Monica Klein was a former sex educator for Planned Parenthood. And so she and I have become good friends because we're both in the same field, fighting the same battle. But she realized one day as she was teaching her class, she realized that what she was doing was, she thought that she was doing good, that she was helping the students by giving them, information. But one day a girl in her classroom raised her hand and asked, do I have to have sex? Do I have to be sexually active? And it was in that moment that she realized that what she was doing was creating pressure, was putting pressure on the children to become sexually active. And, the research bears that out. There was a report that came out that said nearly 40% of students who participate in CSE, in a class that uses CSE curriculum, feel more pressure to become sexually active than the pressure that they feel from their romantic partners. So Monica Klein realized what she was doing, and she started to have a change of heart, and she eventually stopped working in that regard, doing sex education for Planned Parenthood. But so she has a very unique perspective, of course, because she comes from the inside. She said that she was taught that parents are a barrier to service.
Amazing.
And so what they were instructed to do was to create relationships and to reach out and to form relationships with young people so that the young people would begin to seek them out for advice on sex and other matters. So, she saw the division that was happening between children and their parents as a result of this sex education approach. She also saw how they were feeling pressured to become sexually active. And she also began to see how it was really a brilliant business model, because if they could sexualize a young person, that the average number of abortions that this young person would have, into their 20s, would be between 3 and 4 abortions. So and this was even with the use of contraception. So because we know that even among teens, contraception, there's no such thing as safe sex among teens. So, that's just kind of one of those myths that's out there. So when teens engage in sexual activity, it is always a high-risk activity for them, even if they use contraception, because many of them, contraception in the teen population has a higher failure rate than usual. So their executive functioning is not developed. I'm almost done raising my kids here, but you've raised kids too, Mark, so you understand that even, sometimes we can't get our kids to remember to take the garbage out when they're supposed
to brush their teeth or make their bed or any of that.
Yes, exactly. So, we know instinctively parents understand and know that it is not healthy for children to engage.
And speaking of the business
activity.
model, as you mentioned, the something I mentioned on this program before is that half of women or teenagers getting abortions have been on some form of contraception.
Right.
And Planned Parenthood knows this.
Right. And so if they can increase the amount of young people who have been fed the lie of sexual freedom, right, and sexual rights and the right to sexual pleasure, if they can sexualize a certain population of the student body, and then they become sexually active,
Right.
It will automatically bring in revenue for them.
Yeah. And
Especially if they've established that relationship
right.
locally in the community
And,
with those children already. So, because in a certain percentage of those students, they will need STI treatments, they
right.
will need abortions, they will pursue, contraception also
Mm-hmm.
through Planned
Mm-hmm.
Parenthood.
Also, I'm learning that they will also, some of them, be pursuing puberty blocking drugs.
Yes, well, you bring up a very important point, and many people don't know this, that
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood is the second largest provider of transgender hormone therapy.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that they have gotten on the transgender bandwagon, so to speak, and they
Mm-hmm.
are promoting that through all of you can go on their social media pages, you can go on their website and see how they are pushing transgenderism
Yeah.
also. And transgender ideology is included
Yeah.
now in comprehensive sexuality education. So
So,
it's a big
yeah.
moneymaker. And I encourage people, if they want to find out more about, the money and the people and the power behind the transgender movement, to check out Jennifer Bilek's blog. Her last name is B as in boy, ILEK,
Mm-hmm.
the 11th hour. She has done an enormous amount of research on the power and the money behind this push for transgenderism,
Yeah.
the transgender ideology and transgender treatments. So,
Yeah.
very alarming stuff indeed.
Yeah. And as you said, the LGBTQ, that whole gender ideology is very much mixed in with this so-called comprehensive sex education.
It is, yes, absolutely. So it's not a matter of just, proponents of CSE will claim that sex education needs to be equitable and it needs to address everybody. And, I continue to assert that sexual activity for teens, whether they be heterosexual or part of the LGBT community, is high risk activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period, for everybody. So, the information that we want to get to our students is we want to assert that we want the students to understand that this is an activity that is going to put them at high risk, no
Mm-hmm.
matter how they identify.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, I always say that it is not the purview of the school to push a certain view on matters of sexual orientation and gender identity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because these are subjects that are up for debate
Mm-hmm.
and that many families feel very differently about.
Right.
So in order to assert one view on these issues really goes way outside
Yeah.
of what the schools should be doing. So it is not in their this is not their responsibility to
Yeah.
teach on
Yeah.
these issues. These are things that are handled at home with families, with parents.
Yeah, it was eye-opening that this whole push for comprehensive sex education came out of SIECUS, which is the
Yes.
organization, Sex Information and Education Council of the United States. I think I got that right.
Yes, you
And
did.
and they were organized in 1964, so they go way back. I was reading that one of the beginners of this was a director of Planned Parenthood way back in 1964, and also
Yes, Mary Calderon.
yes, that was her name,
Yes. Mhm.
and also Alfred Kinsey. A lot of this was
Yes.
based on the work of Alfred Kinsey, and people might be aware of the Kinsey Report and how he has been discredited because he based a lot of his research on people who were sexual deviants who were
Right.
in prison and so forth. So it's really amazing to see that this has roots going way back into the 1960s.
It really does, and that's what it seems so really outlandish to make that connection,
Mm-hmm.
but it is parents really need to understand where this whole push for comprehensive sexuality education comes from. Its roots are in an Alfred Kinsian philosophy
Yeah.
of sexual rights for children and the right to sexual pleasure. So Alfred Kinsey asserted that children were sexual from birth, and he conducted his research and collected data from pedophiles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and this seems so extreme, but it
Mm-hmm.
is the truth. You can
Mm-hmm.
look it up if you go to Dr. Judith Reisman, who unfortunately just passed away recently, but she has done a lot of research and had kind of fought against this agenda for decades. She's written
Mm-hmm.
several books, very prolific author. So, but she uncovered a lot of what was behind comprehensive sexuality
Mm-hmm.
education, and it's this philosophy. And then, interesting that CECUS was developed by somebody from Planned
Yeah.
Parenthood. So,
Absolutely.
and it's interesting too to note that, I always say all roads lead to Planned Parenthood. It's
Yeah.
kind of true
Right.
because even the largest publisher of comprehensive sexuality education curriculum is ETR Associates. And ETR Associates was established by people who worked for Planned Parenthood.
Wow.
So they kind of broke away from Planned Parenthood to start this business to sell CSE because in California they were trying to insert CSE and parents were objecting, and they discovered that, look, the relationship between the actual curriculum and Planned Parenthood is too out front, it's
Mm-hmm.
too connected,
Mm-hmm.
it's too public, so we need to bring some degree of separation here
Yeah.
so that if parents and community members realize that it's Planned Parenthood
Yeah.
behind the
Yep.
education, they're going to know, what it's all about.
Yep.
So a group of people left Planned Parenthood and started ETR Associates.
Mm.
So, many people don't even know that.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yes, all
though,
roads lead
yeah.
to Planned
Well,
Parenthood.
the same sort of thing was going on in the discussion with the school committee for Worcester, that there was one curriculum that was obviously backed by Planned Parenthood, which was the so-called Get Real curriculum.
Right.
And since that was brought up, it seemed to me they opted for the 3 R's because that was not as clearly connected to Planned Parenthood, but it is.
Well, it is, yes, because it doesn't really matter to Planned Parenthood which CSE curricula gets
Mm-hmm.
implemented into the school system because, they're all kind of based on the same philosophy and they all kind of accomplish the same thing.
Right.
So, of course, they do start out trying to recommend their curriculum, but
Yeah.
I think that they were just as pleased to get the 3
Right.
R's in
Right.
as well. Advocates for Youth is a youth activist organization that has produced the 3 R's curriculum, but
Mm-hmm.
they are allies of Planned Parenthood,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
both groups are very closely associated with CECUS.
Mm-hmm.
So there's connection all over the
Right.
place, and you can go to my Facebook group, Massachusetts Informed Parents. I actually published a little piece on the connections between
Mm-hmm.
Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see all the connections
Mhm.
there. So, I think that Planned Parenthood was pleased that the 3 R's
Yeah.
was implemented.
Well, speaking of different objectives, there's the objective of sexualizing children and getting them to go to Planned Parenthood and getting them to use their services, especially abortion and also using puberty-blocking drugs. Another sort of even deeper objective is apparently disrupting the nuclear family.
Absolutely.
And so and that's kind of a Marxist goal, is to, if you read Marxism going all the way back to the 1800s, one way to seize power is to take power away from the nuclear family.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's another sort of a sinister thing behind the comprehensive sex education.
Right. Well, and it goes back to what I, said, Monica Klein said, that parents are a barrier to service. So the family is the foundation of any healthy society.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can break apart the family and disintegrate the family and those family ties and bring separation between children and their parents. And even if you can, push an LGBT agenda in that ideology, these things affect, of course, the stability of the nuclear family.
Yeah.
And so once that family starts breaking apart and the strength of society and of individual communities begins to disintegrate, then that leaves opportunity for government to come in and to have more control. So ultimately, it really goes back, it always goes back to, my husband always likes to remind me, everything ultimately is about money and power.
Yeah.
So,
Especially
because
power.
so if you have a group of people who are struggling, and the government, is more than happy to step in and help, then that equals power and control. So on a broad scale, that's ultimately what we're talking about here, right? But these policies and initiatives and agendas are having real life consequences for individual families and for individual young people. I get the phone calls, Mark, from parents who are upset because of things that have happened to their children while in school, and how the heart of their child is being turned against them, or being turned against the things that turned away from the things that their parents have tried to instill upon them. And so it's really, really heartbreaking to hear those individual stories.
This concludes part 2 of my conversation with Mary Ellen Siegler. Tune in next time for the final segment of the interview, when we will further discuss how our public schools are exploiting our children and subverting our families. Until next time, remember, we should always treat life with care and respect. And at the very least, we should first do no harm.
Thank you for tuning in to First Do No Harm. Dr. Rollo welcomes your questions and comments. You may contact him at markrollo978@gmail.com. That's MARKROLLO978@gmail.com. Thank you, and until next week, remember, first do no harm.